Okay, I think we're good. I'll say to begin with, I have not taught something like this before, so bear with me. I'm glad Dwayne got here, so it made me feel better when he walked in. But I'll tell you something about me, and also I missed the first two because I was working. So when I came last week, I didn't really know what to expect. I was like, he's like, hey, will you help me out with this? I'm like, sure. He talked, he did everything. I was like, I didn't really have to do anything. And then today he was like, hey, can you do a little more? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll help out. So I'm going to give it my best go, but I'll tell you something about me that will help out tonight, something that I love. Growing up, when you read the Old Testament, you just think, oh, this is really cool, all these weird stories, because it's all these weird, wacky stories in the Old Testament. Well, as you get older, you start seeing the New Testament in the Old Testament. Specifically, you start seeing Jesus in the Old Testament. And then as you continue to grow, it's like every story, you can find Jesus in there somewhere. And that's been one of the funnest things for me in my journey of studying the Bible and reading the Bible is finding these Easter eggs throughout the Old Testament that lead to Jesus. And I love that. And as Michael was talking tonight about the story of the man who was paralyzed, who was healed, I started thinking right when he said that, oh, that's almost in here tonight, what we're looking at. And what it is kind of like what I mentioned right at the end last week about how the children of Israel were children. And this is their growing period. This is when they're learning and they're becoming adults. They're becoming, well, Christians in reality. And we know that back then, when you were born, this was your father, this was your mother, you are an Israelite or you are not an Israelite. Well, within these stories of Judges, we're starting to get this idea in place that, well, sometimes God uses people who are not Israelites to do great things. And so these people who have been God's chosen people and who are still God's chosen people, I assume to this day, they have these other people that come in and do things that God ordained, and God had that happen for a reason. And so we're starting to see this idea, which Jesus taught, is that this is available to everybody. It doesn't matter who your father and your mother were. It matters who you are. And not only does it matter who you're born, it matters who you're going to become when you are baptized with me. When you become a Christian and when you follow me, that's really who you become. So as he was talking about that, I noticed that. So as we read through tonight, look for that. You'll see some of these things. And like, I don't notice them at first, like when they're talking about Jael or Jael, I don't know how you say it, but the lady that stabs the guy, she was a Kenite, or her husband was a Kenite. That is not an Israelite. That is not an Israelite nation. That is not within the Israelite nation. And that lady did a great thing and really won this battle because of her thing. So I want to start with that and say as we go on, do we need to read? Do we read the story, or do you like reading some of it maybe?
Yeah, we can start with with chapter 4.
Yeah, we're going to pick up in chapter 4, and we may read a little bit here because it's 2 chapters tonight, so I don't want to spend too long reading. But beginning in verse 1, it says, And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in that long word. I'm not going to try and say that one. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, I don't know how you say it, which one, the son of Abinoam from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and from the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and with his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Barak said to her, If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, but for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called out Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went with him. I'll stop there for a minute. So a couple things to notice beginning is, of course, this chapter begins with one of the most common phrases in the book of Judges is, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord again. So going back to our cycle that we were talking about, they do good, they start doing bad, they get taken over, they get oppressed, then they call out for help, and God redeems them. So we're back to this circle again, which again just falls into the idea of them being children and needing God and Him coming up. And what's different about this one, and I assume part of the reason why this one was brought out, is we have all these judges. Well, this is the first time we've heard about a judge that's a woman, obviously. And you can look into that a lot, or you can look into that a little bit, but the truth of the matter is it wasn't very common that we know of, because this is the only judge we ever heard of in the Bible. There's a few other instances of people being prophetesses, or we see that. And I think the main point of that to notice is that just like almost every other story in the Bible, front to back, God doesn't always use the most important person that you think is going to be. If you look at kings in their successions, or David was not the oldest. A lot of times God chose the second or the third son that was going to be the king, because God chose who was best in his kingdom. He wants who's going to do the job. And so this is another version of Deborah was the best judge they had at that time. She was a good judge. Obviously, she was a good judge because she had a tree named after her, that she sat under her own tree. If you have your own tree named after you, must do something right. But she did a good job. She was loyal. She had a lot of wisdom, obviously. And so God chose this person that may not have been someone's first choice. And that's the same with a lot of the women in the Bible. You look at the stories of Ruth and other people that we're real familiar with, they were kind of obscure things. And these little obscure moments and these little obscure people, just like, David being the weak guy, not Saul being the guy that was, head and shoulders above everybody else. These are the people that carry on God's word and the ones that spread the word. And then, of course, going back to our looking for Jesus, what is one of the first thing Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the poor, blessed are the weak. Jesus was not speaking to a group of people that were educated, wealthy, of high standard, of high acceptance in the community. These were outcasts. They were homeless people. They were, just not the great group. And that's the ones that Jesus said, I'm calling you to change the world with me. We're going to go together. You're going to follow me, and we're going to change the world. And just like Michael said with the paralyzed guy, Jesus said, do you want to be healed? He asked him. At no point in the Bible does Jesus ever come and club somebody over the head and said, you're coming with me. He doesn't say that. He always asks, do you want to follow me? Follow me with a question mark. Are you going to follow me? Because it takes that part of us to do it, because we are not necessarily children of Israel that are just born. I was born an Israelite. I'm one of God's chosen people. I just got to do what's on my list here. That's not the way it works anymore, especially not for us. So it's that same idea of, do you want to be healed? Do you want to do this? And so as we meet these couple new judges, Deborah calls together. She gets her commander of the army, which is Barak, and she says, do you want to go beat these guys, basically? Are you going to go beat them? And he's like, well, yeah, but kind of like making excuses, just like the paralyzed guy did. Well, but I don't know if I need to go. She says, no, you're going to get these people, you're going to get this, and you're going to go down there and you're going to fight this guy and we're going to defeat him. And he says, well, you're coming with me. Like, you got to come with me if we're going to do this. So it's the same idea going in there. I already talked about the significance of Deborah's role. Do you have anything before we move on?
So it's interesting because Deborah, when I was looking at it, two things. She reminds me just like my grandmother. She's just a woman full of experience and knowledge and life, and people would always come to her, to just receive insight and understanding. And just, I think that speaks to just, sometimes we think you got to have a title, you got to be this, no, if you just serve God and live your life through your experiences, you can offer influence to people. You know what I mean? You have a lot to offer, whether you have a title, whether you don't have a title, just through your life and experience. And just through her life and experience, people would come to her on a regular basis seeking insight. Hey, I got this problem. Hey, this happened to me at work. What should I do? And essentially that's what she would do. She would judge. She would give insight and help people solve their situations in life. And then the other thing I noticed, I thought was interesting, was Barack kind of came off as kind of like timid, kind of like, man, I don't know, kind of like, really not really what I know I should be serving God, but I really don't want to get involved. And I love how she, even with being called as a woman, still respected the boundaries, still respected the relationship. She didn't say, well, you no good, lazy, sorry, you should be down. She said, hey, you know what? God called you. Don't you think you should be going? It's like, I don't know. Well, I tell you what, you should go. And she encouraged him. She motivated him. She held him accountable, but I still think there was a respectful relationship that she had with him, because at the end of the day, hey, look, we all have a job to do. You're the commander. I'm here to encourage you. You might right now not be in a good place, but just the power of influence, the power of just a kind word. Hey, you know what? I would love to see you at church this Sunday. Hey, you know what? Hey, that's fine. I'll tell you what, I'll come pick you up. Versus, now you know that you should be doing, and you should be up, but hey, you ever thought about leading songs? Or hey, how's your Bible study? Just that caring, loving, nurturing influence.
Which is what women are good at.
What is different, just like then you're going to give a hand to a woman. God does it anyway. God does. He said, I'm going to hand them into your hand. He's telling them it's nothing they're going to do. All they got to do is go say, I'll be there and do it. God's going to do it anyway. That's the same thing with us. God does it. We don't do anything.
Championship's fixed.
Well, like he was saying last week, how, we have these different people with different abilities. And the first three judges we've met, they were very, like the guy that stabbed the guy was very cunning, very, and he was the one that went and stabbed that Eglund, or what was his name? Eglund? No, Eglund, king of Eglund. He's the one that stabbed. Othniel was the leader of the army. He was also the judge. Well, you get to Deborah. Deborah is not the leader of the army. She's not out necessarily fighting the battle, but she is inspiring Barak and the other people to fight the battle. So like he said, she's using something that maybe it's because she's a woman, maybe it's just because she's wise, that she's being a very good leader in the fact of delegating out other things and inspiring other people. And that's a very important part, because sometimes if you're the person that you have a gift or whatever it may be, you may just need somebody to inspire you a little bit. If you've ever sat next to someone or, that is singing next to you and you can barely hear them, but when you hear them, you're like, that person sings beautifully. And just saying something like, man, you sing really well. Like, I love hearing you sing next to me. Well, that might inspire that person to sing a little bit louder, or to help lead songs, or help teach other people songs. And you would have never known if you wouldn't have just said anything to that person, because that person may be just very timid. And there's a lot of introverted people. I mean, I get it. I'm an introverted person. I don't like getting up in front of people. And some people love that, and that excites them. Me, I'm like, I like to disappear into the crowd, and that's where I like to be. But sometimes it takes someone going, hey, you want to help me teach this class? and you got to get up and do it. And that's how you learn, and that's how you grow. And that's how Barak and these other guys, that's what gave them the inspiration to go out and fight again for something that they'd cried out for. Because sometimes as we've seen, when God delivers these people and when he saves them, he's asking them, or he's saying they need to ask for it. God, we need your help right now. We need you to deliver us. And then from there, that's when the miracles start happening. You want to read on a little bit? Or
Sure.
You good? Let's pick up our reading a little bit. Let me find a good spot to start here.
1 verse 17?
Yeah.
Verse
Verse.
14.
17 good.
Yeah, I let off at 11, didn't I?
11.
Okay, so let's pick up in 12. This is when we're introduced to Sisera, which is the commander of the Canaanite army. When Sisera was told about Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera called out his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. And Deborah said to Barak, "Up!" There's her inspiring again. "For this is the day in which your Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you?" So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. And Barak pursued the chariots to the army of Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. But Sisera fled away on foot to the tent. Well, I'm going to stop there for a second because then that introduces us to the next person. I wanted to say one more thing about when I read one of those verses, it reminded me. It's on my notes, but I can't find it. That's okay. So now we're introduced to Sisera, who is the bad guy in our story, obviously. It's interesting that, he was talking about how Barak may have been timid or scared. I can only assume that the mention of how many chariots that Sisera had, he was probably scared as well. He must have been thinking he was up against an army that he could not overtake. Also, it had been 20 years. This has been going on for 20 years. So it's not like this is just something new and you're all hyped up and, someone attacks America and we're like, no, we're America. You can't do that. This is like, we've been down for a while, not doing so good. And then we go, we're just going to fight back all of a sudden now after 20 years. It's a different kind of thing. And again, it took Deborah to inspire him and tell him, up, the day is yours. Let's go get this. So she was just a great leader without being the person on the horse in front, saying, follow me into battle. She was in the back and she was saying, you guys can do this. So that's a great thing from her. All right, we'll pick up here. What verse did I stop off in?
Verse 17?
17? Okay, yeah, now we're at 17. Okay, but Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. So this is where we're introduced to Jael, who is not an Israelite. For there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not be afraid. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. He said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. She opened up a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the opening of the tent. If any man comes and asks you, is anyone here? Say no. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. She went softly into him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. And behold, Barak was pursuing Sisera. Jael went out to meet him and said to him, come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking. So he went to her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. So we're introduced to another woman here, another woman who we've already said not an Israelite, but playing a big part of this role, probably the biggest part of actually finishing off this battle, which is interesting because it goes back again to one of the things that Deborah said to Barak at the beginning when she said, we're going to win this battle, but you're not going to get the glory for it. And what did she say? She said, God's going to get the glory, but it's going to be from a woman. And so Barak probably thought at that time, oh, Deborah, of course, she's going to lead us into battle and she's going to be good. And she did, but then we have this other woman that just shows up out of nowhere and really gives that finishing final blow. So just another story, another person that is an unlikely person in the story that really brought this thing home and finished it.
I say something real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I find interesting about that woman, and it's the same thing about like Rahab the prostitute, is that you would have these non-Israelites, and apparently the word has spread about God and the covenant of God, the people of God, and essentially they had enough faith or trust to say, you know what, I think I want to be on this side, not the other side. I've heard about this God of Israel. I've seen some of the things he's done. I think I want to be with his side, on his side, than against him. And so she made this conscious decision, even though they had a covenant between her and the other guy that she's about to kill. But you know what? I want to be on God's side, so I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to make this chance. And it could go good. It could go very bad. He could wipe out the rest of my entire village. But I'm going to make this choice right now because I believe it's in my best interest to follow the will of the God of Israelites.
Yep. And so back to our story, just kind of explain, and I do this for myself because I get lost in these stories when I'm reading them, and I have to read them 10 and 11 times sometimes to remember. So they have the battle, and Israel is winning the battle. Sisera, the army, or the leader of the army, gets away. He's running away. He's trying to hide. He's trying to flee. And Barak is chasing him down, basically trying to find him. He comes to a tent of this lady, and he's like, hey, can you hide me in your tent? And she's like, of course, you don't know me, but bad tent choice on your part. But yeah, sure, come hide in here. And it says she covers him up, and basically he's hiding in there. And it also funny that he asked for water and she gives him milk. So she's like, I'm not going to give you exactly what you want, but I'll give you something. So just another little neat stab almost of that, you know, I'm not working for you here. I'm working for someone else. Covers her up, and he says, hey, if anyone comes, tell him I'm not here. So he's just hiding out, and I don't know why he picked this lady. Maybe he thought she would help him and she wouldn't know, but obviously God had other plans, and this lady saw an opportunity. And it is interesting, I think, to know that there's a lot of gruesome things in Scripture. Almost always they're done by men. And that when we hear these things, like we just heard last week about stabbing the guy where the knife disappears. If I was writing this story, you would think it would be kind of a Rahab thing. I'm going to hide you. If somebody comes, I'm going to say, he's over there, go get him. But she really took it on her own hands. I mean, she took it on her own hands, and she goes, well, not only am I going to go, wait for Barak to get here, I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to end it right now. We're done with this. And then when that guy comes, it's not, hey, he's hiding in there, just so you know, it's done already. So again, God using these unlikely, unknowing people, it's really kind of a plot twist. If you were watching this in a movie, you would probably play up Jael as just a nice lady, and she's like, oh, I'll hide in here. And then the plot twist would be, oh man, she just did it. Like, wow, I wasn't ready for that. You'd think that, the guy like The Rock would be coming in, and he would be like Barak in this story, and he would come in and he'd be the one that was going to save the day. But no, here's this lady that took care of business. So it's just neat that all these unlikely things, and that was obviously her thing. Did you have something to say?
That's why I thought she gave him milk. That's kind of, oh yeah, come on in.
There, yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that very much.
Evidently, he was pretty comfortable there because he went to sleep.
He went to sleep, yeah.
He wasn't worried.
I mean, he was a man. We can pretty much sleep anywhere. That's still. Yeah. You say, why'd she kill him? Well, she must have known who he was, and that he was it doesn't say why necessarily, but it does say, so when Barak comes by, she knew that Barak was looking for this guy. Yeah. So obviously it wasn't, it doesn't really specifically say like how far he fled. Maybe it was 10 miles. Maybe it was, the battle's here and he just hid over there. Like you don't really know. So we kind of have to just infer on that part. But obviously she knew who he was, and she knew that they were after him, and she decided she was going to take this in her own hands. And
She probably seen him before.
possibly seen him before. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think she knew who he was.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, he was aware who he was.
And the king had like some type of peace treaty.
That's right.
you won't mess with me, I won't mess with you type thing. So she knew who he was,
Yeah.
and apparently she knew of the battle against the Israelites.
Yeah. Yeah, which even really, she knew that she was breaking whatever treaty it was that her husband had with him. So she even took wasn't even a non-risk, it was a risk that, she could have gotten in a lot of trouble possibly, but she did what was right. And that's something to say. Yeah, that's right. Sounds like a good woman to have around is what she sounds like.
All about faith.
Yeah.
All about faith. They
Yeah.
and us too.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's interesting because if you research her, you can tell it wasn't her intent, because when Barak was passing by, they used the word, she slowed him down. So he was gonna just pass on right by her. He didn't think, I guess that's their fault, right? They
Yeah.
never
went out to
meet.
meet him,
Yeah, she went out to meet him and said, come and find me.
Never trust him.
Yeah,
Don't trust tents or milk. There you go.
that's right. That's right. So if I ever go home and if I say, "Hey, could you give me a glass of water, sweetie?" and she goes, "Here's some milk," I'd be, watch out. Watch out, guys. Yeah. Yeah.
So you not going with him, you lock the door.
That's right. That's right. Lock the door. Lock the door. Do you have anything before we move on to the next part, which is really just the kind of the wrap up, really? Chapter 5. This is an interesting part. We won't necessarily read chapter 5, but I think something interesting about this is in Scripture, we know we have narratives, which stories, and then we have a lot of poetry. This is one of the few times where we have a story, and then immediately after we have the poetry too. So you can kind of see both sides. A lot of times people try to refute the Bible, refute Scripture because of some of the differences in narratives and poetries, and they say, well, it says they wiped them all out, but then it says they were here later. And this is a good example where you can really see it side by side, kind of like the Gospels, how we have 4 different Gospels and they all are telling the same story. It's just you see different aspects of it. This is kind of a neat way where you can see it. Okay, I read the historical reference of the story and the narrative of it. Now I get to see immediately what it is, putting it into words, kind of like putting it into a song. It's the same story. It's just got a little more flair to it. It's got, it's easier to read instead of saying all these, exact people's names and exact territory names with all these long, hard things like you heard when I was reading, because I don't read very well. Then you get it where it flows nicely and sounds pretty, and you can actually see it, and you can kind of draw those conclusions from each one. It's a neat thing that's just slightly different from other stories where they're way later. When we read of David is a good example. When we hear of Saul killing his thousands and David killing his 10,000s, it sounds a lot better than just going over each battle that they did. And this is a same thing, but close together. I think that's a neat, different thing that just kind of jumps out in this book of that. Do you have anything on that part?
Yeah, and I like the song because it kind of gives you the overall idea of what's going on, and I like the idea that it's like it takes a team, right? It's sometimes we get caught up thinking about the popular person or the person with the title or who's in charge or who's running the show. We always say, all right, who's the best pitcher? Who's the best quarterback? Tom Brady's the best. Yeah, he's good, but if he ain't got no receivers, he can't catch the ball himself, right? But we never talk about that, or we even talk about. I was just reading about a particular team, and they have people that they hire that are on their practice squad. You'll never see them. They never play. They're just hired strictly to basically get beat up by the main players. They're the practice squad. But yet, that practice squad is integral because every day they go and train and practice, they have to practice against somebody of higher caliber. And so there's guys, their sole job is to go in and play these guys knowing you'll never, ever see the daylight on a court or on TV. But you get paid a decent amount of money to be the practice squad or the trainer or something like that. And so within that, like I said, it takes a team. You got Deborah, who's an influencer. You got Barak, who's fighting the war. And then you got Jael, who takes matters into her own hand. And so God delivered Israel But really, all three of these people, each play an integral role. And again, I think that speaks to the fact that there's so much stuff that needs to be done and can be done in the church. And you don't always have to be out front. You don't have to have a title. You can be the person who just fills the communion cups. And that's important. You know how I know? Because when we don't have them, you're like, man, where's the communion cups? Where's it? You know, so you don't really think about how important that is until there's nobody to run the sound booth or the sound, you know, messes up and you're trying to figure it out. You don't think about how important these things are when you come and have a fellowship dinner and, you know, and it looks a mess. You know, you don't think about the ladies that come here and they decorate and make it look all nice and cozy and pretty until you come in here one day and it don't look nice, cozy, and pretty. You know, or when you come in here and the building's a mess. You don't think about the guy that takes care of the building so that you can go into nice, clean restrooms, nice, clean building. Because overall in the church, it really is a team effort. But I just think culturally we get caught up on the person that's up front, out front, because that's just our culture. That's who we think is important.
Yeah, and again, back to this being the first example of a judge that wasn't doing everything on their own like the others. This was really the first time when we have teamwork in Israel in a way, because like we talked about a little last week, they had Moses, they had Joshua that were really leading them, and now we have these judges, and the judges are judging, but they're not necessarily leading all the time. But now we have an example here where they're really working together.